Hey internets, it is time for another video on leftist memes. And this one is specifically about an issue I've noticed with communist memes in particular over the last year or so, which is that there is this growing trend of communist memesters kind of entering this brain rot era, you can call. And brain rot is a bit of a buzzword, but for the most part it means low quality, repetitive content that doesn't really have any basis in truth. Let's just jump to this example. California is saying I should build a high-speed rail system, and Musk coming in saying no, cancel it, make a hyperloop instead. And so then California makes nothing, that they'll have a prototype in a few years, and that it's concerning that China has been building more high-speed rail systems than, California. With the implication here being, oh, China's successful communism and California is failed capitalism. But really, the main issue here is that the punchline of this meme relies on something that isn't actually true. California's rail program was already failing long before Musk just came in and suggested a hyperloop. And they ignored his suggestion, and then they just continued to waste billions of dollars on their project. And so the failure is that of DNC project mismanagement, which by the way was based on socialist policies, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Elon Musk. In fact, when Pamphlets, a stereotypical communist propaganda account, posted this meme, it actually got ruthlessly community noted. Gavin Newsom is the governor of California, and he's the one who's been overseeing California wasting $16 billion on their project, not Elon Musk. So that's pretty dumb. But here's another one. I'm hungry, Javier. Yes, very sad. By the way, I am doubling my salary. Now, this one is even more ridiculous because, it's basically just saying that, oh, Argentina, libertarianism bad. But the claims it's making are all entirely false. Argentinian poverty has gone down under Javier Milei. Argentina is one of the most food-secure nations in South America. There is no Argentinian famine going on. But what's even more interesting and more ridiculous of a lie is that the alleged pay raise that's going on here, that Javier Milei allegedly gave himself, was actually an automatic pay raise that was set up in 2010 before Javier rose to power, and he actually canceled the pay raise. Yes, you heard that correctly. Not only did he not give himself a pay raise, he actually canceled an automatic pay raise. And again, there is no Argentinian famine. There hasn't been one. This is just entirely fake. In other words, what I mean by brain rot here is that memes from the far communist left are all about disinformation. So any punchline to any poor attempt at humor they're making is always rooted in some kind of lie. This has technically always been a problem with communist memes, as I have pointed out in some of my previous videos. They are essentially just internetified versions of communist propaganda of the past. But lately, this element of brain rot levels of dishonesty has been completely cranked up to maximum, alongside just random name dropping and associations, like this meme right here. Once you learn enough history, you either become a Marxist or a liar, from Sabrina Carpenter. And yes, thousands of communists were uncritically reposting this. Now, this one is actually unintentionally funny for a completely different reason. One, Sabrina Carpenter didn't actually say this, which means it's just more disinformation brain rot, but also the fact that it's not actually true means that this meme technically proves a negative. The communists who are reposting it are actually negating their own point because by lying, and yet them being Marxists, they're showing that what the meme is saying isn't actually true. And even if it was, Sabrina Carpenter isn't exactly the greatest intellectual of our time, so even if she did say it, it would just be appeal to random celebrity slop. And another thing I've noticed that communist memes have been increasing lately is appealing to people's ignorance. For example, this one right here. At least we can protest when our police murder us. And then a guy under the Chinese flag going, your police murder you? The implication here is of course that police brutality doesn't exist in China, which is just absolutely not true at all. Rather, instead, there's more of an interesting nuance behind this, which could use its own video, but the TLDR of it, since this is just a meme video, is that in China people don't really have property rights. At least not in the American sense. And because of this, China can just execute their dissidents. For example, there's a problem known as the forced organ harvesting problem in China, where Chinese government officials will just have someone who's a dissident to a Chinese government policy just kind of randomly kidnapped, and they harvest their organs and then they sell them. No real due process. Whereas this meme is trying to imply that China is some kind of utopia of human rights, which it just absolutely is not. This is a flabbergastingly false thing to imply. And yes, you might be noticing a bit of a pattern here, which is that it's all simping for China. That is another thing that has kind of increased in popularity over the last year. The commies really want to say that China is successful communism. It's false and has been refuted at length, but the thing is, memes give them a way to just kind of continuously sell that lie, even though it's very obviously not true when you look into it. Like this one, for example. The China man thinks he's a socialist. The guy with a USA hat, and it seems to be an AI meme as well, well, and then a China guy going down with dollar hegemony. Which, of course, to those of us who know what capitalism and communism is, this is completely nonsensical, because this doesn't actually meaningfully change anything. Currency competition is not when successful socialism, especially when it's two different state currencies. In no way does the US dollar competing with the Chinese yuan imply anything about changing the status quo towards either direction of socialism or capitalism. This is what I like to sometimes call cactus divided by cat butt logic. There is no coherent point being made here. So if you ever find yourself looking at a far left meme and just kind of scratching your head wondering what its point is, the answer is that the people making these memes probably don't really understand the point they're trying to make themselves very much either. My guess here is that this is probably some kind of ludicrous association fallacy. They associate China with socialism and America with capitalism, and therefore if the Chinese yuan gains value over the US dollar, then in their mind that means successful communism. Which is weird, because if you actually read Marx, that's not actually communism at all. But again, most communists haven't read Marx themselves, so this kind of brain rot doesn't surprise me. And really shouldn't surprise anyone, because it only gets more ridiculous from here. Like this meme. F Argentina, all my homies hate Argentina. Yep, once again we're back to Argentina bad. And for some reason, we just have the Shrek donkey here, because my heckin' cartoon character needs to agree with my political beliefs. And beyond that, what joke is this even trying to make? These fine gentlemen whose IQ is so high that they don't know how to wear pants do not like Argentina, and therefore you should not like Argentina. And also the donkey. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you couldn't tell, the tanky communist types have a very large hate boner for Argentina. And for those not keyed in, the reason for this is fairly simple, because Argentina elected Javier Milei, who is of the Libertarian Party, and thus largely pushes economic and state policies that go against communist thinking. However, the communists have a problem, which is that Argentina has largely been doing quite well under Javier Milei. Poverty is down, inflation is down, and even the rent went down, which is something the tankies really don't like, because they're always harping on about their rent control idea, despite the fact that rent control has been proven many times to not work. And yet Javier comes in, applies some basic economics, and rent actually goes down. So in other words, the reason they hate Argentina is because Argentina has been embarrassing them. It's been showing that their ideology doesn't actually work. And so what do? Very simple. They just kind of lie about it. Like with this meme right here. Argentina becomes moneyless state, and then Mao going, son, I'm proud of you. With a little graph showing the Argentine peso versus the United States dollar going down. The implication here being that the peso has become worthless under Javier's administration. Which is not actually true at all, of course. Because this graph is actually showing the result of the inflation before Javier's administration came into being. And when you look at the same graph where it's actually including his administration, you can see that the decrease has actually started to flatten out, which means the inflation rate has gone massively down. And so the entire point that this meme is trying to make here relies entirely on extreme economic illiteracy, and also just an attempt to blame Javier for the problems caused by the previous socialist administration. And this thing of them posting the Argentine peso and trying to pin it on Milei, it's actually something that they've been doing over and over again. And that's what really makes it brain rot. Take a point that is based on false information or fallacious reasoning and just spam it nonstop. The fact that it's been refuted 1,000 times doesn't really matter to them, because it is, again, a very easy thing to refute. If you just look at the overall graph of Argentinian inflation, it becomes very obvious that inflation was growing before he took office. He then takes office, his policies go into effect, and kerplunk. They're basically blaming Milei for this part of the graph, hoping that nobody notices that he wasn't actually in office during this part of the graph, and then intentionally cutting off this part of the graph. That's effectively their argument. Very obviously false, very dumb. Because what's happening here is that communists have honestly kind of lost the debate on factual grounds, but they still want to spread their ideology, and so the only option they really have is to just lie. And that's what we're seeing in the brain rot era of communist memes. It's just another extension of what I pointed out in my previous video: repeat false narratives until they become true. Which again, in many ways, is something that hasn't really changed much. For instance, they're still posting memes like this one, where it's just a big Newtzy symbol, and you got the Republicans and the Democrats at the end of this. Basically the same old grift of everybody that isn't us is a massive Newtzy. The difference is it has simply been cranked up to levels of total reality disconnection. Like this one right here. Capitalism. Just work harder, bro. Rent, healthcare, groceries going up, and record corporate profits. And then under communism, it's a magical utopia where everybody has housing, and free healthcare, and free food, and free this, and free that. People's library, community clinic, bro, we literally built housing for everyone. And look, even the sun is smiling. which of course just basic history shows you this is totally wrong, and the exact opposite of what actually happens. The communist regimes have never had a quality of life higher than the countries that allow for more free market policies than they do. But they could never really acknowledge that or cop to that in any way, because that would mean admitting that their ideology doesn't work. And this reveals why they lie, because lying and cope is really all that they have. They've lost the game on the playing field of reality, and so thus the only strategy for them to keep playing is to create their own reality. Create a new playing field where lying is just an alternative fact, bro. And part of the reason they do this is because a lot of the tankies, the communists who defend the old communist regimes of the day, a lot of them are showing the negative effects of living in this alternative reality by showing how they suffer from terminal dichotomy brain. For example, this meme right here. A groundhog with the Iranian flag pushing back China and a bunch of others, saying, "Let me solo them." Now, to many people, this might just seem confusing, but if you understand the tanky mindset, it's actually entirely expected. Tanky communists tend to think that because the West has a lot of corruption, then violent regimes like Iran must therefore be the good guys. There must always be good guys and bad guys. And because a lot of Western mainstream media is just propaganda schlop, then that therefore means that a lot of the Chinese and Iranian media must be telling the truth. Which is completely insane, but that's what happens when you have dichotomy brain. And so yes, a lot of them actually really do unironically support the Ayatollah government of the Iranian revolution. For instance, look at this meme right here. "Hey guys, I wonder why GPU prices are so high, lol." And then just a bunch of Marxist theory, concluding in "Death to America and its coalition." Yes, there actually is a fusion of radical Islamic terrorism and communist ideology that is going on right now. That is the level of brain rot and disconnection from reality that we're dealing with here. And let's not forget, for the cherry on top, Garfield memes. Stalin killed millions of Nazis. Again, another meme where the punchline relies on an alternative reality, where the deaths during World War II were the only deaths that happened under Stalin's regime, completely ignoring the millions of their own citizens that they killed, and completely ignoring the millions that died during the Holodomor, none of whom were Nazis. But that doesn't matter to the communists. What matters is that they can say that they're Nazis, and then use that claim to just ignore reality. It's okay that millions of people starved. The only people who starved were Nazis. How did the regime ensure that the only people who starved to death were Nazis? Magic fairy dust, I guess. Who knows? But ultimately, the conclusion here is that what we are seeing is the fact that communism in the year 2026 has become all about quantity over quality. If they could just spam enough falsehoods and get enough people to repeat those falsehoods, then they don't actually have to focus on the quality of actually engaging with people who are refuting them. In fact, their main incentive is to not engage with any of their refutations, because that would detract from the spam. Because one of the things from a mathematical reasoning perspective, one of the problems with lies is that you can technically generate an infinite number of lies. For example, a mathematical equation, usually there's only one correct answer, but there's an infinite number of false answers. And this translates into the world of meme generation with the fact that it's entirely possible to just generate an infinite number of memes based on disinformation. Which means that my earlier assessment in my previous videos on leftist memes kind of still hold true. Ultimately, in the end, it's all about propaganda. The only difference is that in the brain rot era we're now in, they've figured out that it's a waste of time for them to even try and hide that fact anymore, instead opting to just spam nonsense until everyone's brain is scrambled eggs. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And if you want to support me, you can do so on Ko-Fi, Subscribestar, or by buying some merch. But for now, that is all. Thanks again for watching. Till next time.